I'm 22, and I thought I had finally gotten my life on track. I'd moved into my first apartment on my own, landed a decent job at a small marketing firm, and for once, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. My place wasn't huge, but it was mine. Sunny in the mornings, quiet at night, with a little balcony where I could drink coffee and feel like I had it all together. The building itself was old but charming, full of creaky floors and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. The only exception was the guy across the hall. I'd seen him maybe twice in the first month I lived there. A tall man in his late 40s, graying at the temples, always wearing the same navy windbreaker no matter the weather. We never really spoke beyond a nod in the... Then, one night about 6 weeks after I moved in, I came home to find a small, plain cardboard box sitting right in front of my apartment door. No label, no return address, just my name written across the top in black marker. I figured it was from a friend, maybe a housewarming gift that got delivered without proper packaging. But when I picked it up, it was heavier than I expected. Inside, under a layer of crumpled newspaper, was a small stack of Polaroid photos. The first one was of me, standing on my balcony, drinking coffee. It had been taken from somewhere above, like through a higher window in the building across the street. And the next photo? Me again, this time unlocking my apartment door, wearing the exact same coat and scarf I'd had on that morning. I flipped through the rest with my stomach turned. Every single was of me, in different spots around, going to get the mail, buying groceries, even coming out of the laundry room. And then, at the bottom of the one final photo, me, sleeping in my bed. I didn't sleep at all that. I sat on my couch with every light in the apartment on, the stack of Polaroids spread out on the coffee table like evidence in some crime drama I never wanted to be part of. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept staring at that last photo, my own face, relaxed and vulnerable in sleep, and I kept asking myself the same question over and over. How? The only people with keys to my apartment were me, my landlord, and the building's maintenance guy. The locks were new. I'd watched them being installed when I moved in, and yet someone had been inside while I was unconscious. I thought about calling the police right away, but part of me hesitated. Would they even take me seriously? There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints on the box that I could see, just creepy photos and a feeling in my gut that someone had crossed a line so far. I couldn't even see where it started anymore. At around 3 a.m., I made a decision. I was going to change the locks first thing in the morning, but when I opened my door at 7:15 to head to the hardware store, I froze. The hallway smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, and leaning casually against the wall across from my apartment was the man from across the hall, the neighbor I'd barely spoken to. He was smoking, like he'd been waiting there a while, and when our eyes met, he smiled. Not a friendly smile, but slow, deliberate, like he knew something I didn't. Then, without a word, he nodded toward my door and said, "Might want to keep that locked at night." Then he just walked away. I stood there in the hallway, watching him go, my skin crawling. The rest of that day felt like I was moving underwater. Every sound seemed sharper, every shadow in my apartment heavier. I kept replaying his words in my head, "Might want to keep that locked at night," and trying to decide if it was a warning or a taunt. At lunch, I went to the hardware store and bought a new deadbolt, one of those high-security kinds that's supposed to be nearly impossible to pick. I also grabbed a door jammer and a cheap indoor camera I could set up facing my bed. It felt paranoid, but after seeing those photos, paranoia seemed like the only sane option. When I got home, I was halfway through installing the new lock when I heard movement in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps, stopping right outside my door. I froze. The footsteps didn't move on. They just stayed there. Then 3 quiet knocks, not loud enough for anyone else to hear, just soft taps like someone didn't want to be noticed. I didn't answer. I didn't even breathe. After about a minute, I heard the faint sound of paper sliding under my door. I waited until the footsteps finally retreated before I dared to. The paper was a single Polaroid. This time, it wasn't of me. It was of my balcony, and standing on it, clear as day, was a tall silhouette taken from inside my... Except, I'd been at work all... I must have stared at that photo for a solid 5 minutes before my brain caught my eyes were seeing. The timestamp in the corner should have been taken less than 2 hours while I was sitting at my desk across town, which meant whoever took it had been inside my apartment in the middle of the day. My stomach knotted. I went room to room, checking every closet, every corner, even under the bed like a terrified... The windows were still locked from the inside, and the balcony door wouldn't make sense. That's when I remembered the camera I'd set up facing my hands shook as I opened the live feedy bedroom, just like it. But when I went to check, the entire day's footage was gone. No alerts, no error messages, just a blank space where there should have been hours of recordings. I sat down on the edge of my bed, clutching my phone like it might bite me. Either the camera had malfunctioned, or someone had erased the files on purpose. And then, from the living room, I heard it, the faint click of my front door unlocking. I didn't move at first. It was like my brain couldn't convince my body this was actually happening. That click was followed by the slow, careful turn of the knob, and then a pause, like whoever was on the other side was listening to see if I'd react. I slipped my phone into my pocket, grabbed the small aluminum flashlight I kept on my nightstand, and crept toward the doorway. My heart was pounding so hard I thought for sure it would give me away. Every step felt louder than it was. The front door eased open an inch, then two. I pressed myself against the wall, just far enough to peek, and there he was. My neighbor from across the hall. Same navy windbreaker, same slow, deliberate movements. He stepped inside like he belonged there, closing the door behind him with a soft click. In his hand was a small keychain with at least half a dozen keys on it, one of which apparently worked on my brand new lock. He didn't see me. He went straight to my kitchen, pulled out one of my dining chairs, and sat down facing my living room. He just sat there, his back to me, still as a statue. I could hear the faint jingle of the keys in his hand, like he was turning them over and over. I had two choices: slip out quietly or confront him, and in that moment some reckless part of me wanted answers more than safety, so I stepped into the doorway and said his name. He didn't startle, didn't even look surprised, just slowly turned his head toward, that same smile on his face. "I was wondering when you'd notice," he said. I demanded to know how he got in. He tilted his head slightly, like the question amused him, and held up the keyring. "These open a lot of doors around here," he said almost proudly. I told him I was calling the police. That's when his smile faded. Not completely, but enough to make the air in the room feel heavier. He stood, slipped the keys back into his jacket pocket, and said, "You could, but you might want to see what's in your closet first." Before I could reply, he walked out, shutting the door behind him like nothing had happened. My first instinct was to chase him, but something about the way he said it made me freeze. My closet. I didn't want to look, but I had to. When I opened the door, at first I saw nothing but clothes and boxes. Then my eyes caught on the far back corner. A small hole, about the size of a quarter, drilled clean through the drywall. And on the other side of that wall, his apartment. I stood there staring at that tiny hole, like it was a snake, ready to strike. My brain kept trying to downplay it. Maybe it was from old wiring. Maybe the building had some weird shared ventilation system. But deep down, I knew better. The edges were too clean, too fresh. There were faint wood shavings still on the closet floor. I crouched down, my pulse thudding in my ears, and leaned close enough to feel a faint draft coming through. I couldn't see anything, just darkness. But the thought of an actual line of sight my apartment from his side, my skin crawled. I grabbed my phone and took a photo with the flash on, aiming it through the hole. The image nearly made me drop my phone. The photo showed the other side of the wall, and a camera lens pointing directly, not a cheap one either. This was a high-end DSLR mounted on a tripod. Next to it, a small desk covered in stacks of Polaroids, just like the ones I'd found in. Only now I could see there were hundreds of. I backed away so fast I slammed into the opposite wall. My breathing was shallow, my hands slick with sweat. My first instinct was to dial 911, but then I thought about the erased footage from my bedroom camera, the way he had a key to my brand new lock. How many other people in this building could he get to before the police even arrived? Still, I knew I couldn't just stand there. I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained everything. The photos, the break-in, the hole in the wall. They told me to stay put and lock the door until officers arrived. But 5 minutes later, before they got there, I heard movement next door, heavy footsteps, the scrape of furniture, then the distinct sound of duct tape being ripped from a roll. By the time the police knocked on my door, the apartment across the hall was empty. No furniture, no tripod, no Polaroid, not even the smell of cigarette smoke. It was like no one had ever lived there at all. The officers didn't seem nearly as alarmed as I thought they should be. They glanced at the hole in my closet, shined a flashlight, and told me it could have been from old maintenance work. When I showed them the photo I'd taken of the camera and the piles of Polaroids, their expressions tightened, but they kept exchanging these quick looks like they were trying to decide how much they actually wanted to get involved. One of them went across the hall to check the other apartment, while the other stayed. A few minutes later he came back and said the place was completely empty. Not just no one home, empty, wiped clean, cabinets bare, walls scrubbed, even the carpets looked freshly vacuumed. He said the rental showed the unit had been vacant for months. I told them that was impossible, that I'd seen him going in and out for weeks. They didn't argue, but they didn't confirm anything either. Just said they'd look into it and advised me to keep my door locked at all times. When they left, I sat on my couch staring at my own front, feeling more unsafe than The hallway was quiet now, too quiet, like the building itself was holding its breath. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bedroom. I pulled the couch away from the wall, positioned it so I could see both the balcony door and the front door, and kept every light on. At some point, exhaustion took over, but it was a restless, shallow kind of sleep. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a faint sound, something small and metallic hitting the floor. I sat up, scanning the room, my eyes catching on a single silver key lying in the middle of my carpet. It hadn't been there before. I stared at that key for what felt like forever, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. It was just sitting there in the dim yellow light of my lamp, perfectly centered on the carpet like someone had placed it there on purpose. My first thought was that maybe I'd dropped one of my own keys, but when I picked it up, I knew immediately it wasn't mine. It was heavier, older, One of those brass keys with deep, worn grooves that felt smooth from years of use. A small metal tag was attached, stamped with the number 3B. I live in 4C. 3B was the apartment directly below mine. I didn't even have time to decide what to do before I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks from somewhere beneath me. Not on my door, not on my walls, but on the floor. I froze, clutching the key so tightly the teeth bit into my palm. Then came a voice. Muffled, low, almost like it was drifting up through the vents. My name, over and over in a rhythm that made my skin crawl. I couldn't make out the words after that. Just the steady cadence of someone speaking in a tone that was too calm for the hour and the circumstances. I grabbed my phone, turned on the voice recorder, and crouched by the floor vent in the living room, holding it close to capture the sound. That's when the voice stopped, replaced by a single loud thud from directly below me, like something heavy had fallen. Silence followed. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I was going to take that key down to 3B and see for myself what was going on. But when I got there, the door to 3B was already ajar, and inside, it was exactly like the apartment across the hall, completely empty, except for one thing. Right in the center of the floor was a plain cardboard box, identical to the one I'd found outside my door. I stood in the doorway, the stale air from the empty apartment hitting me like a wall. The box sat there in perfect alignment with the doorway, like it had been placed so I couldn't miss it. My stomach churned. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but I stepped inside anyway, my shoes echoing against the bare floor. The box was unsealed this time, its flaps folded inward. I crouched down, half expecting the smell of old newspaper like before. But there was nothing, just silence, and that faint metallic tang in the air that reminded me of blood. Inside was a single Polaroid. It was me, from behind, standing in the doorway of 3B. The timestamp was current, like it had been taken only seconds earlier. I whipped around, scanning the bare walls, the open kitchen, the shadows stretching down the hallway toward the bedroom. Nobody was there. But that photo, someone had taken it while I was standing exactly where I had been seconds ago. I backed out slowly, box in hand, and shut the door as quietly as I could. My mind was racing. The apartment had no furniture, no curtains, nowhere for someone to hide. But someone had been there, close enough to take my picture without me hearing a single thing. Back upstairs in my own apartment, I dropped the box on the table and locked every lock I had. Deadbolt, door jammer, chain. I even shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. That night, I didn't move from the couch. I kept the lights on and the TV playing quietly just to drown out the silence. For a while, nothing happened. And then, around 2:45 a.m., my phone buzzed. An unknown number had sent me a photo. It was of me again, sitting on my couch, eyes fixed on the TV, taken from outside my balcony door. I dropped the phone like it burned me and scrambled toward the balcony. The glass door was locked, curtains drawn, but when I peeked out through the small gap between them, the night outside was so still it almost didn't feel real. No movement, no sound, just the faint glow of the streetlight casting long shadows across the parking lot. I stood there for a solid minute, barely breathing, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. I slid the curtains shut and double-checked the lock on the balcony door twice, my pulse hammering in my ears. I thought about calling the police again, but what would I even say? That someone was somehow in every place I went, seconds before or after I got there? That they could clear an apartment in minutes and leave no trace? I'd already seen how little the officers cared the first time. Instead, I sat back down on the couch, phone clutched in my hand, scrolling back through the photos in my messages. That last one? It wasn't just of me. In the reflection of the darkened TV screen, I could see a faint silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, standing just outside the balcony door. I zoomed in until the image blurred, but I could still make out the navy windbreak. I didn't sleep at all. When the sun came, I packed a single duffel bag, whatever I could grab, walked out without looking back, and drove 3 towns over to crash on a friend's couch. When I went back 2 days later with my friend to start moving my stuff, my apartment door was wide open. Inside, everything was gone. Furniture, clothes, dishes, even the carpet in some place. The place had been gutted, and taped to the center of my empty living room wall was one final Polaroid. Me, sleeping on that same couch in my friend's apartment, with the same timestamp as the night before.